And we're live. And I'm pissed off. And I know you think I'm pissed off because, the United States abandoned Ukraine yesterday, and we became a third world rent-seeking uh, imperialist country, and the president is lying about President Zelensky and who started the war. I know you think that's why I'm pissed off, but it's not. I wrote my column about that yesterday. I got it off my chest, and I'm ready to move on in the world. Projections and all. And then today I woke up and the tech gods did not smile upon me. It is 6 minutes late, and I want to humbly apologize because Jonathan Rauch was here waiting for me, and Ev Gaman was here waiting for me, and Nastya is in town, and she and Ava were here waiting for me. And I have a message to all of you who are running big hotel chains. Get your goddamn internet working properly because, some people, it's not a majority of us, but we have to run shows at a particular time and we don't have, satellite connections and we're not frickin' Elon Musk. And so when you say you have Wi-Fi in the rooms and, it's going to support, all the high-speed internet connections that your guests use for porn and stuff, fine. But like when we need to run a show, it's got to work. And I was here on time, as Ev can say. I was even logged in on time. Then my computer crashed, and then I couldn't reconnect because the Intercontinental Hotel, which does not sponsor Dog Shirt Daily, and I'm sorry to say, your internet connection just sucks. And 1 star. And so now I'm here running off my phone, and probably my audio is terrible and nobody's telling me. Is that right, Ev?
No, that's so bad.
I can hear you perfectly.
It's not so bad. Rave reviews, Intercontinental Hotel. Um,
What city
Look,
are you in?
I am in Miami. The sun is shining. The birds are chirping. It's going to be a great frickin' day for our ongoing betrayal of Ukraine, the face of which Ava is here to scream about it. Ava, what do you think about U.S. policy toward Ukraine? Yeah, I agree.
Do you have any other thoughts?
Right.
That sums it up. Thanks, Ava.
Nastya, where are you guys?
We're like 15 minutes away from DuPont. It's so pretty.
In
Uh,
what city?
in Washington, D.C.
They are in Washington, D.C., the home of the, used to be Brave, now we would say it's the home of the rent-seeking, the extractive, the,
We're really nailing it down. Like it's what time is it?
Nastya, where did you come from?
Oh, Kyiv.
and ask Nastya why she's in Washington, D.C., the home of the rapacious.
Let's
Them.
okay. Let's pretend that he did ask. To launch an amazing project called Escalation, which is a podcast about the relationship between the United States and Ukraine that I have been making with colleagues at Lawfare and Goat Rodeo for the past year-ish. So we're launching that on Monday, February 24th, which is the third anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
Wait. Russia is not the aggressor. We have a
Right.
new view of that.
We have a new policy.
Apparently.
And do you support your dictator president in his rapacious attacks on Russia?
Oh my God, this is so absurd, guys. It's so absurd. Like,
Are you personally responsible for this war, Nastya?
I'm not. I'm really not. it's just so absurd because it's so like every time Trump opens his mouth on this topic, and not just Trump, but specifically him, whatever he says is like so blatantly false. It's just absurd. Like Zelensky's ratings are 57% as of this month, not 4, which is what he said. 57. Like how do you get from that number to this number? Right, Ava? It's insane.
She seems unperturbed. And Nastya, where are we doing a launch event for the? Where and when are we doing a launch event for the Escalation podcast?
It is at 10 a.m. on February 24th, the next Monday, at Brookings. And it's going to be super fun. And we might do more events. In fact, we will do more events, but
We
I don't know.
are doing more events.
Yes.
So, Jonathan, do you have any other questions for Nastya about what she's doing in Washington before we let her go be a tourist for a few days?
Yes.
I suppose we should go find a link to this event and RSVP in the chat, right? Is that how this works?
And actually, it's filling up. I think they may be setting up an overflow room for it, but
like
space is unlimited in the space is unlimited in the electronic version for those who are not in Washington or for those who are. Space is limited in the IRL version, which, by the way, good on you all for coming to a live in-person event.
We'll have Fiona Hill.
We will have Fiona Hill there. We will have Constanza Skeltenmuller, and we will have Nastya and Tyler, and I'm going to be there. The big question, of course, for all of these events, what do I wear? Do I wear, suit and tie because it's the Falk Auditorium in Brookings?
Is that what you're supposed to do?
Yeah,
I'd love to know what I'm supposed to wear.
Yeah, no, you should wear business clothes.
Amazing.
But then I have the whole dog shirt question. And then because, it's a Ukraine event and I'm on public and I'm on screen, there's the Vyshyvanka question.
I'm wearing Vyshyvanka.
You're going to wear a Vyshyvanka?
Yes. Do you want to vote on which one?
I just want to say I gave Nastya the job like a while back of finding me a dog Vyshyvanka. And I still don't have a dog Vyshyvanka. But I do have a red, white, and blue Vyshyvanka, although I'm frankly a little bit embarrassed by the red, white, and blue part right now, because it's a bad time to be an American. We're rapaciously tariffing Ev. We're abandoning Nastya. And Jonathan and I are just sitting here trying to say, but we didn't vote for this shit. That's how I feel about life.
It's bad. It's bad. Okay, we're all wearing suit and tie and Vyshyvankas. Hasman got a new suit, I told you. Like a full set.
No.
Sorry?
You can't wear both Vyshyvanka and tie.
Well, right, I know. But I mean, like, the general theme is classy and businesslike.
Classy and businesslike and Ukrainian nationalist. All right.
Okay, I'm going to go. You guys do your
Welcome
thing.
to Washington, Nastya. Welcome to Washington, Ava. May you both have superior days. And bye, sweetie.
Okay, it's going to take a while. Bye, guys.
Jonathan Rausch, Ev Gamon. Lovely to see you both.
Good morning.
Nice to be here among friends. The mornings are sleepless anyway.
Is that?
What is on your respective minds today?
Well, I have something that I've been thinking about and would raise, but it's not about Ukraine.
That's fine.
I am thinking about the large constitutional issues that will be facing the Supreme Court sooner or later, probably sooner. And I have a hypothesis about how they might surprise people a bit. I just wanted to gauge reaction and see where people are on this. My guess is that the conventional wisdom is correct, that this court will be sympathetic, and in fact probably unduly sympathetic, to Trump's efforts to manage the entire executive branch unilaterally from the White House, regardless of statutes empowering independent agencies, inspectors general, and other processes that Congress has attempted to put in place to constrain his willful authority. And that's what people say, and I expect it's true. So I expect that a lot of civil service rules, or at least some civil service rules and inspectors general rules about who can be fired and when, will go out the window. And that with this president in the White House, that will be a bad thing. On the other hand, here's what I'm thinking about and would like to get others' views on. My sense of this court is that where they're coming from is not the conservative majority. The others don't count. They might as well, live on the moon. The conservative majority is not simply about the stronger the executive, the better, and the more unitary the executive's power, the better. The conservative majority is kind of obsessed with each branch staying in its lane, but within its lane having a whole lot of sovereignty such that other branches can't take that away. And that would imply that a bunch of other stuff that Trump is doing, involving infringing on what have been core congressional rights, the power of the purse, for example, whether he can close entire agencies that Congress has chartered on his say-so, that would be USAID, for example, that those things which begin to step on Congress's toes, that the court is going to stick up for Congress more than Congress will stick up for itself. And the court is going to tell the administration, where Congress is in its lane, where it is directing money and creating agencies and demanding that money be spent and that programs, duly enacted statutes be enforced, you have to do that and you don't get a choice. And we're ordering you to do it, even if Congress doesn't insist. If Congress doesn't like the way USAID, which is duly enacted, is functioning, it needs to change the law, but you cannot. And that will create an interesting dynamic. So that's my thought, and I just wanted to try it out.
Ev, what do you think?
I don't want to express this kind of cynicism or all of this is only rhetoric and the court is just gonna side with power, but that's how I feel, but I don't want to say it, so I'm kind of in a weird spot. What do you think, Ben?
Well, I think in a very general sense, I agree with Jonathan, although for a very different reason than the reason that Jonathan just articulated. I think Trump is going to lose a lot of the litigations. I do agree that as to things like agency heads, independent agencies, that stuff is going out the window. But that stuff was going out the window before Trump. He is not the conservatives on the court have had a bee in their bonnet about Humphrey's executor and Article 2 appointment stuff for a long time. And so I don't think that there's I don't really think that's a Trump-driven thing. However, I'm not convinced that Trump will win on the civil service stuff. I think the lower down you go into the executive branch, from agency heads, the more the court, or at least the three justices here who matter at all, which is Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, and John Roberts, will tend to look with favor on congressional restrictions on removal. As to the other stuff, look, the merits of it vary. And as to Ev's point, that the merits may not matter because we live in a world where one side has the votes. There's something to that. And, I was pretty confident that there were not 5 votes, very confident that there were not 5 votes for the immunity thing, and there were. And I don't think that's because of the merits of the immunity discussion, right? That's because of Ev's point. So that said, look, I don't think there are 5 votes for the idea that the president can refuse to spend money appropriated by Congress. I don't think there are 5 votes for the idea that, birthright citizenship is a myth in the face of presidential action. Now, that said, I think for exactly the reason that Ev just described, you need to assume that they are, that there are the votes to do that, because they're going to surprise you sometimes. And so I expect Trump to lose a lot of these litigations. He might win the war despite losing every battle, but I think he's going to lose a lot of battles, except the sort of higher level appointments clause question. But I think we have to plan for the idea that Bev is right, even as we retain some measure of faith that Jonathan is right. And I've given up long ago relying on the Supreme Court for anything. I don't think it's an organization that is organized around getting the right answer to questions, for a lot of different reasons. Some of them legitimate, some of them corrupt and illegitimate. It's an organization, and so we should not assume that because we think it is the right answer, that is the answer that they're going to come to. And rather, we should assume it is an organization that you play in, that you make your case to, and then you deal with the outcomes. And so, by all means, let's play. Let's treat every case as though it were going to be decided on the merits. But let's keep in the back of our minds that nobody ever went broke betting on the political nature of the Supreme Court. How's that? One hand, on the other hand, on the other hand, on the other hand, on the other hand, and on the other hand answer.
It's a lot of hands, but can I just clarify? Is what you're saying that you no longer believe the Supreme Court is on the level because of its blatantly made up decision in the immunity case? Or is what you're saying that it's still kind of on the level, but that the range of outcomes is just much wider than you ever would have thought before the immunity case?
A little bit of both. I don't think the immunity case was on the level. I don't think, by the way, just so that people don't think I'm criticizing just the conservatives on the Supreme Court, I don't think the disqualification case was on the level either. You had a perfectly clear statement in the Constitution that they did not even try to apply to the current circumstances. And that was all 9 of them. And so I have stopped thinking that because the Constitution says something or doesn't say something, that the Supreme Court will reflect that. And by the way, I could go back and back and back. There's a whole lot of this stuff. I also always bear in mind that the current Supreme Court majority is an engineered one in a different world, that's not that different from this world. Merrick Garland would be on that court, and Amy Coney Barrett would not. And so I'm not, I don't start with the assumption that it's the natural order of things that the Supreme Court looks like or does, how it looks and behaves right now. I also think in the vast majority of cases, justices most of the time are trying to get the right answer by their lights as they see it. And I'm not going to pretend that the institution is, hopelessly and endlessly and always and exclusively political. And so I do think the single best guide to what the court is going to do is to study the briefs and figure out what you think the right answer is. That's the best predictor of the justice's behavior most of the time is, if you look at the world through their lenses at the briefs, figure out what the right answer is. They're mostly trying to get it right most of the time. So I don't mean to propose infinite cynicism. I do mean to propose a healthy dose of cynicism in the most pressing cases of the greatest political sensitivity, and the greatest separation of powers sensitivity. And so that's the cases that you're describing. And I think that, we should be a combination of idealistic and cynical about it.
Well, we know the Supreme Court reads the election returns. Mr. Dooley told us that, 150 years ago. So I'm going to go with a modified version of my hypothesis, which is that if the court chooses to be on the level, and if we believe what we think the conservatives and the Federalist Society have been telling us for the last 20 or 30 or 40 years, they do have an opportunity to make coherent constitutional law within that framework. And there will be one aspect which I don't like, which is giving the president too much unfettered power. But there will be another aspect which I do like, which is cabining the president's power to only those things that the Constitution specifically gives him, and not the things that it gives Congress, and telling Congress the only way to change the law is for you to do it. And I think that would be good if they do it. So I'm going to change what I had to say from a hypothesis to a hope, for what that's worth. And I'm also going to say that a subsidiary question, or a question that arises, is the constitutional crisis here? And my thinking about that, I want to get both of yours, of course, but my thinking about that is that the answer is yes, pretty unequivocally. That there's several layers to the constitutional crisis. The second will be when, because I believe it's when, not if, Trump frontally defies an order from the courts, and does it in a way which, you can't just say is the ordinary skirmishing about compliance. I think he will. I don't see any reason why he wouldn't. If I were in his shoes, that's exactly what I would do, because why not? But that's a bit down the road. But the first layer of constitutional crisis, which has already been pierced, is Congress's abrogation of its responsibilities in a wholesale and complete way. Essentially, statute is being rewritten on the fly, ignored on the fly, and Congress is doing nothing about it. Now, that may change in a month or two when Congress begins to have its say in the form of, the reconciliation bill, the continuing resolution that's going to have to worry about the debt limit down the road. Those will all be opportunities for Congress to have a bite at the apple. And of course, for Democrats, are probably going to have some interesting strategic choices there, and even some influence. Nonetheless, Congress, as of now, has completely abrogated its independence as a branch of government, and that, I think, is a constitutional crisis, because the Constitution does not function as intended without Congress's participation. And in that respect, I think maybe even the court could do some good if it makes quite clear, if it disambiguates the question of what Congress's role, and says, you need to do it because the president can't do it for you. So I leave all that with you.
So I never use the phrase constitutional crisis because I don't know what it means.
I
And
just told you.
I know, but people use it in radically different ways, and it's usually a lazy shorthand for a really fucking big problem, and that I don't really want to spell out the nature of, and so I will just accept your description of the problem in lieu of the phrase constitutional crisis. Look, I entirely agree with your description of congressional muscle atrophy and abrogation. Every single one of the problems that we're facing are something that, with a flex of its index finger, Congress could fix. And Congress has the power to address all of these issues, and it refusing to do so for partisan reasons. This is an old problem that has developed over the course of the, probably 1980s till now, we are seeing the culmination of many years of congressional refusal to do its job across many different axes here. Whether the court can meaningfully step in and redress it, I am honestly less confident than you are. Um, um, but there is a constructive role for it to play, and I agree with you. It is to say that the president can't rewrite acts of Congress. But I also think you're overthinking it to some degree. The president, there are a million reasons for the court to say if Congress appropriates money, the president can't unappropriate it. Starting with the fact that the Constitution gives the power of appropriation to the Congress, not the president. So I agree with everything you're saying. I just don't know how to game out, honestly, how constructive the court's role is going to be. And I also don't want to skip to the Supreme Court, skip over the intermediate step of all the district court rulings, all the appellate court rulings that are going to shape that. I don't want to jump to what's the Supreme Court going to do and is the president going to defy an order. I want to start with what's in front of us right now.
I take the point, of course, agree with all that. At this stage, I'm trying to think about the actual constitutional issues in a substantive way. It may be a bit early for that, or it may be that that's the wrong way to think about it, because we're in a post-constitutional era, but
I would suggest that there's a website that you should consult on some of these questions. It's called Lawfare. And we have been spending a lot of time on some of these constitutional issues under the impoundment matters, the appointments clause matters, and I would recommend it. I think we've been doing a good job on some of that stuff. What is on your morning, Ev?
Well, listening to you talking, I was kind of struck by the fact that I don't know if I don't want to make a historical statement, but for the first time in several years, judges have a legitimate reason to be not only siding with power for opportunistic reasons, but also because they are afraid of what is going to happen to them if they are going against the administration. And that is scary. And that led me to the question, well, so we know what the Supreme Court looks like, but at the lower levels, has Biden managed to appoint a lot of people? And what kind of people did he appoint? Are they rule of law oriented people? Are they more like, so who are the ones who are going to be fighting for the protection and the preservation of the rule of law at the lower levels?
Well, so first of all, anytime you appoint a large number of judges, and Biden appointed a very large number of judges, there's a lot of diversity, right? And there's no litmus test that these people are sworn to. So they're going to be quite different from one another. By the way, a bunch of the most aggressive rulings have been made by Trump appointed judges. And so I don't start with, the assumption that because a judge is appointed by Joe Biden or Barack Obama, he or she is going to be an aggressive rule of law person. And because a judge is appointed by Trump, he or she is not. I start with this assumption that judges are very different from one another and they have different sensibilities, and that is the party of the appointing president is one input, but it's not necessarily the dominant input. There are great judges who come from all over the place. I do think there's a few factors at the lower court level that tend to make judges more or less aggressive that are generalizable. So the first is where they are. There was a lot of talk during the Biden administration that every case seemed to be brought in front of this one judge, Matthew Kacsmaryk in Texas, and that wasn't an accident, right? And similarly, you're seeing a lot of cases right now being brought in jurisdictions that are like the District of Columbia, where the bench is, very, very high quality. New England, places where the bench is, tends to be more liberal, whether the judges are appointed by Republicans or Democrats. And so that's a factor that's, look, I have not seen a lot of evidence that judges are cowed right now. They've been being pretty aggressive and in entering temporary restraining orders and preliminary injunctions. They've been holding the government's lawyers' feet to the fire, the poor career Justice Department attorneys who end up litigating these questions. They're not, this has not been a case where judges are shrinking violence. The question in my mind is, as you go up the appellate ladder, the further up the appellate ladder you go, the more ideologically conservative the bench tends to be. And the reason for that is simply that, there's actually more space for ideology in appellate law than there is at the trial court level a lot of the time. And so you end up with, particularly in some circuits, you can do a lot of winning at lower court levels. And then when you get to the circuit court level, it gets a lot harder. And when you get to the Supreme Court level, it gets even harder. And I think there's some of that going on. And so I think you should expect plaintiffs will do very well at the district court level because they get to choose where to bring it, and because they're going to bring it in places that are friendlier venues for them. But then as things move up, particularly ultimately, the questions are resolved in a 6-3 conservative Supreme Court. And so as you approach that, things will get more difficult, which is another way of saying the lower down the appellate totem pole that a given issue gets resolved, the likelier it is to be resolved against the administration. And so that's I would say, a crude rubric through which to think about it, but it's a much probably on average more accurate one than the who appointed the president, who appointed the judge rubric.
Can I mention two things that you have talked about, and Roger and others that strike me as important concerns. The first is what I got this from the podcast that I played yesterday. By the way, lawfare podcasts have been a staple, a mainstay, and a godsend. So many
That,
people who know what they're talking about and are Johnny on the spot.
well,
It's
thank you.
it's
That's what we try to collect.
and sometimes they even phone in, from outside the courtroom and say things like, "Well, I just heard the judge say X." Kind of incredible, really. Um,
It's only we have high quality people doing journalism.
Imagine that.
Imagine that.
There might be something to learn from that. So the first question is what Roger called the forest versus trees question. And that's the problem of even good judges taking a narrowly formalistic approach that pretends not to be aware of what Trump is really doing, which is a wholesale reordering of the Constitution, and simply views it as a whole series of narrowly tailored actions to which he's entitled, or at least to which due process is entitled. And they're clearly Trump will play that card. And the second is what I think of as the USAID problem, which is, who cares? There's nothing the courts can do to reassemble that agency anyway. So between the two of them, those strike me as pretty profoundly limiting what the courts will in fact be able to do. Is that right? What they'll be
Yeah.
willing to do.
So the seminal work on the former point is called The Least Dangerous Branch, and about it's a book by a scholar named Alexander Bickel, and it is it has a whole chapter called The Passive Virtues, which are about the mechanisms by which the Supreme Court doesn't decide things and kind of stays out of the political thicket. And it's all about using trees to avoid looking at the forest. And it's framed as a positive, that this is, why we are not afraid of a Supreme Court that will become our platonic guardians, right? Because they have these devices to avoid looking at the forest for the trees. And it's a majestic work. And if you read it in the context of the current environment, where you really want one branch of government to be looking at the forest, it's scary as hell, because all these judges are doing what they were taught in law school, and rightly taught in law school, because we don't want to live in a world of an imperialist judiciary, right? In which they're taught to know your place, right? Make sure the parties have standing. Make sure the question is properly before you. Make sure you're not addressing more than you need to address to resolve the question. Make sure you're responding to material in the record, not material in the newspaper or ambient stuff. And what you're saying is you want a judge to look out and say, holy shit, guys, there's a wholesale dismantling of I don't care what's in the record. Let's leave aside this little standing question. I know it's interesting, but I don't want to get hung up on, look at the whole picture here. We got to do something about this. And that's exactly what good judges are trained not to do. And it is, of course, what members of Congress are supposed to do, which gets back to the earlier question of the abandonment of this field by the branch that's supposed to do it. It's exactly what judges aren't supposed to do. And so what you're seeing, what you're, and what I think Roger is frustrated by, and what you're experiencing, is a kind of looking at the situation and seeing a real mismatch between the tools that are properly available to judges and what I call the situation. And whether you see that as a situation, no pun intended, where the courts need to step up and get outside their comfort zone a little bit, or whether you see it as a situation in which they are just a little bit institutionally limited, and therefore, it should be somebody else's responsibility. That's kind of a matter of personal instinct and taste. And honestly, I have a foot in both worlds on that.
And what about the USAID problem?
Okay, so that's a different issue. And let me, first of all, sort of a matter that I'm quite personally affected by. And so I'm not the most unbiased commentator in the world.
Okay. You understand that it's not just about USAID.
No, of course. I just don't comment on that without saying, like in
yes,
the game.
okay. The generalized version of the query is that Trump will establish a whole lot of facts on the ground, and those facts will be irreversible and very fundamental. Entire agencies and capacities of government will disappear in ways
Yes.
that are not authorized by statute and in ways that the courts simply won't be able to reverse even if they try. That's the problem.
So, I think that is true and that will happen. And there is very little that any judge can do about it. And the reason is that the name executive branch, right? That the executive branch always has the first actor advantage because it is the executive and it does things. And if you choose to emphasize the destructive qualities of the executive branch and the destructive capacity, you always have the first mover advantage. Somebody can't sue until you do something, right? And so you're always going to have the situation, if the first thing you do is destroy Dresden, well, or Hamburg, right? The other side can sue and say, wait a minute, you destroyed my hometown. But you're in a phase where the destruction is already happened, and you're talking about remediation. I think, if the president wants to destroy USAID, there is very little that we can do about that. We can make sure it's costly to him politically. We can make sure that, laws that weren't followed in the course, that there's some redress for people. But, we're not going to be doing a lot of foreign aid over the next few years. And the agencies that are responsible for that are not going to be thriving. So I am at some level, I don't mean to be bloodless and say elections have consequences, but elections have consequences, and that's why people like you and me were screaming from the rooftops, "Don't do this! Don't vote for this!" You know, wrecker who wants to wreck the executive branch, because he will wreck the executive branch. Ev, what do you think Pierre Poilievre will be a similar executive branch wrecker in France?
In France? No.
Not in France. In Canada, or is he more of a boring Brian Mulroney type?
Well, it might not even matter, actually. The polls are shifting, and Mark Carney is up in the polls quite in a surprising way.
And if you guys decide, like Canadian lemons, to follow us off this particular cliff, is the nature of the Canadian Tory party now sufficiently different from the American MAGA movement that you won't have the same problems, or is it a question of whether you get Carney or Poilievre?
Whoa, that's a tough one. I think that it is getting increasingly clear that Canadians are not interested in the sort of destruction of our nation, constitution, and
Yeah,
whatnot. So
they would conclude that our experience, our example is, why is it not more attractive? We're here, you know, people want, I can't understand why people are not lining up to replicate the American experience right now.
but there's a question that's kept on coming back in my mind about, like, we always talk about liberal democracies, and you were talking about, like, that's what, like, the people have voted, but maybe we have put too much emphasis on the democracy part of it and not enough on the liberal part. Like, isn't it the whole point of the post Second World War that the majority, the power to the majority shouldn't be the beacon we're following? Like, that election shouldn't, like, democracy is great, but with check and balances and, like, protection for minorities. And if we want to come back to Canada, our constitution is from 1982, and we have adopted it in the aftermath of the Second World War too, and we have built into it some protection for minorities that I'm not sure you do have in the American Constitution.
So there are substantial protections for minorities. We do not have a minority like the one that you are a member of, right? Which is a sort of self-identified, distinct political community. I think the percentage of Americans that are native Spanish speaking is only a little bit smaller than the percentage of Canadians that are native French speaking. But we don't we don't have a recognized political minority that is based on language. Um, Look, I would say, some of the liberal social contract that you're describing is non-negotiable in the US context. Now, Trump is trying to renegotiate it anyway but that stuff is just frankly unlawful. And the question is, will the courts acknowledge it as such? But I don't, if you ask me as a matter of democratic theory, should the existence of USAID be beyond democratic question? I would say no. I believe in USAID. I believe in foreign aid. I believe in, a lot of the good work that a lot of these organizations are funding. But is Congress obliged to do that? Absolutely not. And should a reasonable American Democratic majority be able to say, hey, we want to get out of the foreign aid business? Yeah, I think they should be able to. I don't think they should be able to by electing a president. That was a set of laws passed by Congress, money appropriated by Congress. If Congress wants to get out of that business, it should be able to get out of that business. And I don't think that should be beyond democratic question. I think we like whether you give $60 billion or away as an exercise in soft power and whatever or not is a legitimate question for democratic majorities to disagree about. I don't think the president should be able to do it unilaterally. And by the way, I don't think under our constitutional system the president is allowed to do it unilaterally. And that's, but I don't question that, you know, a reasonable, well, I mean, reasonable in the sense of not beyond the pale of allowable, right? A Democratic majority could decide to do that. I just think you actually have to do the work. And the court's job here is not to prevent the destruction of USAID, it's to make sure you go through the process of destroying it properly. Which, by the way, that process gives people the chance to say, wait a minute, I didn't vote for that. I voted to make America great again, not to destroy all of our international partners. I didn't vote to, and it gives people a chance to object.
I wish the Secretary of State would consult Senator Marco Rubio
Yeah.
on USAID and foreign aid, but that's another question. I have a Canadian question that's been on my mind a lot. Comes out of an email dialogue with Jonathan Kay of Quillette, who is a Canadian, and
There are a
that's
lot.
this. Is it?
Pick up a rock and there's a Canadian under them.
Yeah, the place is lousy with them. You know, I do want to remind Americans that we did try to take over Canada, and last time it went very badly for us. They kicked our ass.
They burned the White House. Ev personally torched the White House. And when Dolly Madison saved the picture of George Washington and carried it out before the White House was torched, it was Ev bearing the torch.
Just for the record, that was the British, but the Canadians also kicked our ass, and they'll do that again. So here's the question. Is it appropriate right now for Canadians to boo the national anthem, U.S. national anthem at a hockey game? Because they did, and that it takes a lot of doing for Americans to persuade Canadians to boo our national anthem at a hockey game.
In Montreal.
Yes.
Which is
I said yes, go for it. There are times when it's important to be tacky, and Jonathan said, no, that's just too tacky.
Well, I think that it's probably Canadian stance, because I'm not comfortable with Canadian booing either, but I'm not sure it's a question of tackiness or... I mean, I think it really ruffles feather, and that American hockey players are really annoyed and disturbed by the booing. And I think that there are a bunch of Trump loyalists in Team America and hockey players in general. And I don't think we should be radicalizing these people by... and it also creates tensions, and it ignites nationalism, and I'm not sure it's the way forward. Yeah, sure, we have to protest, but I don't feel that it is the way to do it.
I completely disagree.
I know.
I think that first of all, as somebody who believes in confrontational protests that offend people's symbols, I projected Putin as a dickhead on the Russian embassy, the Russian flag at its embassy, and we are now siding with Putin. So why and we're siding with Putin against our allies, including Canada. We're slapping. Why should an average Canadian hockey fan be respectful of our national anthem when we're lyingly claiming that we have a fentanyl problem caused by Canada? That's the official position of our government. Why should a Canadian hockey fan stand respectfully for our national anthem when our government is lying about Canada? I don't know.
I'm not saying we should stand up and be all respectful about it. There are ways to protest, but I just think that it is playing the game of Trump to engage in that sort of confrontation of okay,
but that's a tactical point, right? I'm not sure Jonathan's question is a tactical one. I guess my view is when our government behaves this badly, people um, people should express their anger at it, and we should hear it. Now, I don't believe in fistfights, but I'm not like I'm not sure why we should expect Canadians to be polite about this.
Oh, sure
And
not. But the hockey games have become the place where we're trying to express this frustration, and I just don't think that is the right forum. Because
well,
it's not the right people in that forum. It's not the people who.
look, I'm for all expressions of dismay, and all sense of this is nothing personal, but you're making it personal. Taking our products off the shelves. But I don't begrudge people the way, just as I choose how I want to express my rage at the Russians, I do not begrudge people's choice of expressions of anger at our symbols. All right, folks, we are going to wrap up. Apologies for the tech glitches. Blame the Intercontinental Hotel. Write a note to the Intercontinental Hotel in Miami that says, you know, we blame you for the quality of Ben's recording today, for the lateness. Um, uh, yes, somebody just said in the chat that he blames Ron DeSantis. Boo the Florida national anthem at the next hockey game you attend. Jonathan Rausch, Ev Gamon, we're going to be back tomorrow. It's going to be a great day. And remember, folks, you are watching Dogshirt TV, and it is a revolution in morning television. One might even say it's a goddamn revolution in morning television. And be great Americans and great Canadians. And, you know, don't boo the U.S. national anthem more than is strictly necessary. Talk to you later.